I'm very happy for the people who tuned in, and I think we're going to have a few other people tune in a little late. I'm happy because this is miraculous stuff. And the more people who know about it, the better it is for everybody concerned, including your neighbors, including the people you work with. And on the other hand, Buddhism is a very elaborate and fairly subtle path. And there is a great deal of misinformation out about Buddhism or half-understood things about Buddhism. That's great, but you don't get the full benefit, or let's just say the more you know about it, the greater the degree of benefit you have and other people around you have. So I decided, and I've been a member of the Tibetan Buddhist Center in Philadelphia for, about a dozen years, or maybe it's more than a dozen years now. And I've been studying meditation for about 40 years in about a number of different traditions. I still practice in a number of traditions, but I have a particular fondness for the precision, the elegance, and what Buddhism does for people, which can be a real miracle. I've put together a 4-course overview. It's like a map. I'm going to close this up, participants. It's a map. It's a way of trying to get an understanding. Well, anyway, here's the outline for 4 courses. It's a map. It's a way of understanding. It's, I'd like to think of it as the way if you were planning a trip and you lived overseas someplace and you're planning a trip to Philadelphia, what you'd like to try to do for people is maybe give them a guidebook, maybe recommend a tour, something where they can get a feeling for the history and the culture of the place and maybe some of the main sites. Now, if you lived in Philadelphia, your own experience of the city would be very subtle, very rich, and very complex, depending on how long you'd lived there. But for the person coming there, so they don't show up and they're completely like, what's going on? What is that building over there? It's nice if they have a sense of how all of it fit together. In Philadelphia's case, the geography of the city, where the main neighborhoods are, maybe a little bit about the history, and maybe about the current people. That's what I want to give for this class for Buddhism. Again, because there's a lot of, I'm going to see if I can move all of you guys down at the bottom here. There. There's a certain amount of misinformation about Buddhism, what it's about. A very traditional way that Buddhism is portrayed is you define what the subject matter is or what the topic is. Then you try to say, this is how we're going to go about experiencing it or learning it, the path. Then you say, here's the results you can expect to get from having taken that class or having studied that bit of what they call Dharma. Dharma just means the truth, the way things are. That's the second definition, or very specifically, the Buddhist teachings. So again, we're going to try to provide a map of the principal ideas and practices of 4 paths of Buddhist practice. There are dozens of different kinds of religions of Buddhism or spiritual practices of Buddhism. There's many kinds, but the traditional understanding is that there's 4 main approaches. I'm going to do most of the talking, and I'm going to try to give you a lot of information in 90 minutes. So I've made a very elaborate PowerPoint. I'll do my best to make that PowerPoint available to the people who registered for the class as sort of an overview of your notes. But if you want to take a few notes as we move along, it might help. Because again, I'm going to be providing mostly information. What I want, my goals for the class at the end is that you have kind of a roadmap in your head. It's very much like somebody had taken that guidebook and told you, gone through it with you and showed you, well, this is a little history of Philadelphia, this is maybe some of the places you might want to see, and maybe you should take this bus tour. So that you have a sense when you go into a meditation class, either Buddhist or non-Buddhist, you have sort of a good idea about what you're getting involved with. You also, I'm going to deliberately present, some alternatives, meaning Buddhism is not a single spiritual path. It's a great number of them. And you're going to get a very strong flavor of the different kinds of Buddhisms that are available. So I'm just going to start here with the first slide here. And I'm trying to give an overview of what Buddhism is and also what it isn't. So the name Buddha actually means awakened one. And we refer to it as the Buddha, but the way the Buddha defined himself when asked after his enlightenment, he met another renunciate, another monk wandering, and he had just had this tremendous insight into the nature, like the essential problem of being a human being is, why do we suffer so much? He had a tremendous insight. They asked him, who are you? He said, are you a god? Are you some kind of divine being? He said, no. He said, I'm just awake. That's where the term Buddha came from, the awakened one. Buddhi is a technical term in Buddhism, which means literally consciousness. So the awakened one. He defined himself, he thought of himself as like a doctor, a physician. And in traditional Buddhism, which is what this first class is about, is the original teachings of the Buddha, primarily. All right, he said that I'm not a god, I'm not a divine being, but I actually now have discovered a treatment for this fundamental problem of life, that you inevitably experience suffering and you can find no lasting happiness. I have the medicine. If you'll take it, I've got the cure. Historically, much of the story of the Buddha, which is beautiful and lovely, and I'm very fond of, and I'd be tempted to spend 90 minutes just telling you the legend of the Buddha. Unfortunately, it is a legend, and it was largely composed out of oral histories and remembrances of some of the stories of the original Buddha. And the story of the Buddha that we have now, which you can read online or find on your own, is largely a creation of several centuries after his death. Nevertheless, everybody's fairly certain that there was a historical Buddha. His name was Siddhartha Gautama Sakyamuni. That is his formal name. He was very famously a prince, the heir to a small kingdom in North India and what is now Nepal. And Gautama is his family name. The term Shakyamuni was a little bit of an honorific given to him when he became, later on when he became the Buddha. And it means just the enlightened sage of the Sakya clan. That was the larger group, ethnic group that he belonged to. As the legend has it, he grew up rich and very privileged, and he was the heir and expected by his father, the king, to take over the duties of kingship, but he renounced his kingdom. He renounced his wife, he renounced his young son, and his worldly responsibility at age 29 to go off into the forest and to practice austerities and meditation as an ascetic. Now, a thing to note here is that this is a very Indian practice. I think in the Western culture, they did this in, maybe up to certain parts into maybe the Enlightenment period in European history. But it is not a common practice for somebody to give up everything and to go off into the woods and try to find God or to reach some kind of spiritual maturity. It's such an unusual thing that I decided that instead of the traditional image of the Buddha that we all know and love, I showed you another traditional depiction of, that is over there, that image that you see is, that is Siddhartha as an ascetic, practicing in the forest, practicing severe austerities, practicing very advanced yogic techniques, trying to purify the mind, trying to find what they call in Indian philosophy moksha, or release from the round of endless births, which he saw as nothing but suffering and pain. He actually studied with a number of teachers when he was off in his wandering in the forest. He achieved very profound states of meditation. This would be what in many centuries later, the yogis called pratyahara, the withdrawal of the senses, the ability to actually leave the sense of the body, leave even the sense of self, and enter into certain kinds of very advanced luminous states. He did this for many, many years, I think for 7 years. He almost killed himself doing it because he was spectacularly good at it. He very shortly had his own little band of fellow ascetics who would follow him around. But he came to a very famous incident where he was meditating and he suddenly realized this was getting him nowhere. All he was going to do was destroy himself. And he said there must be some other kind of a solution to this problem of suffering. And if you want to see a very wonderful depiction of the life, the legend of the Buddha, watch the movie The Little Buddha. Keanu Reeves plays Buddha, and it's a very poetic, picturesque, and fairly accurate to the legend depiction of what the Buddha went through. Anyway, when he had his enlightenment, and which I'll explain a little bit more in a minute, he said he had diagnosed the cause of suffering. He realized how to end suffering, and this became the spiritual path of Buddhism in its original form. I am showing you images to help instruct you, and I've chosen images of the monastic community in where the original Buddhism, called Theravada Buddhism, is now practiced, which is in Southeast Asia largely, in Myanmar and Laos and Vietnam and areas like that. The original historical Buddha then taught in the eastern part of ancient India, and it was about the 6th to the 4th century BCE. That's before the Christian era, or before the Common Era. That is roughly the time of the pre-Socratic Greeks, for those who are interested in philosophy. It was an oral culture, meaning they at that time did not write things down, but he had several of his disciples who were experts at memorizing dialogues, having heard it only once. And this is the way many ancient teachings and many epics were passed down for centuries, was an oral culture. People could hear it, memorize it, and recite it. Later on, as Buddhism developed and flourished, remember it came into being roughly 5th or 6th century BC, about 580 before the Common Era. I think that was the time of his death. It developed and became mixed a little bit with some of the developing philosophies of India. And India then is now as a spiritual, it was amazingly progressive place in terms of philosophy and in terms of spirituality. Anyway, Buddhism matured and became a variety of different kinds of spiritual practices. The Buddha image, later on, when we see the little Buddha, like the one who's sitting right next to me over there, is often used as a representative or symbol for the enlightened state of mind. And in fact, people, experts in iconography, would recognize every one of the famous symbols. For example, the hand going down, the hand up, which are about teaching. The Buddhas have different mudras, or hand gestures, which indicate different kind of teachings, different doctrines of the Buddhism. And the famous one is where you'll see Buddha, I think it's on the little statue over there, is gently touching the ground with one hand. That refers to an incident during his enlightenment period. The first images of Buddhism actually were done right about 1st century, I think, AD. They were actually a wheel and footprints. Now, I pulled a set of footprints from the internet, and they claimed it was the images of the stylized image of the Buddha footprint, but it might possibly be Indian or even Jain. I'm not 100% certain it's Buddhist, because by the time of the great medieval Buddhist universities in ancient India, which were about 1,000 years ago, there was a lot of interchange between the different philosophies and different ideas of India. And what was now eventually to become Hinduism influenced the developing stage of Buddhism. The famous image of Buddha only appeared after the 3rd century BC, and some people think there was actually the influence of Greek art in the earliest depictions of the Buddha, which everybody has seen and know. So there's actually not just one Buddhism, there's many. Buddhism, as it flourished over centuries and as it slowly spread to different countries and diversified, it interacted with other philosophies, other religions, and to different cultures, and grew into a variety of different kinds of, I'll just use spiritual expressions. Nevertheless, all the Buddhist schools and philosophies share a common core of practice and beliefs. There is no deep schisms between the different approaches to Buddhism. They all agree on certain fundamental ideas. They argue with one another, but nevertheless, there is a commonality of attitude, beliefs, and understandings. One of those beliefs is that Buddhism has no sense of a God in the way we usually understand it or as understood in many religions. What do I mean by a God? a deity that would be separate from ourselves, perhaps in the universe, or perhaps in a heaven, or even maybe even inside ourselves, but somehow something that we propitiate, we worship, we look up to. There's no concept of a God that way in Buddhism. And in that same way, it's not a faith in the sense that you have to believe in this person, you have to believe in these ideas, or you won't go to heaven, or you might go to hell. It doesn't have that kind of necessity in believing in things. It's actually a very rational, very carefully argued and worked out philosophy. And it is expected to be rational. In fact, I remember the Dalai Lama saying that if science could truly prove, for example, that there was no karma, he said Buddhism would get rid of it. That's remarkable. It is about personal investigation and personal experience, not blind faith. But nevertheless, Buddhism has evolved many kinds of religious rituals and traditions, some of which I'll be talking about in this talk, but primarily this is about the basic ideas and philosophy and what you can gain from Buddhism. Another key element in Buddhism is really, if you think about it, quite remarkable. In Buddha's time, all through history and in the present day, many of us are convinced that we aren't really in charge of our lives. We might say that the reason I am the way I'm is I can't help it, is because I'm hardwired. You remember I heard that term the other day on television. I'm hardwired, meaning it's an instinct. I can't change it. Another belief is you're subject to magical or astrological forces, or you might believe that there's a divine being somewhere that's ruling your destiny. Or you might believe, oh, I can't do anything because karma rules me. It's my fate. Buddhism said that's not true. It says you're ultimately responsible for your own enlightenment, your own spiritual progress, and ultimately for your own freedom from suffering. It's up to you. You have the power to change your experience of life. This is very important to understand, because I can't think of any other spiritual tradition which says that glorifies the human being the way Buddhism does, and says how much individual responsibility you have for your own life. So rather than it be sort of a dogmatic creed, it's really a sort of a philosophy, but also, as you'll get clear, it's a set of practices, it's a way of life, and it's also a system of teachings. And its promise is not gloom and doom, but its promise is joy. And its promise is the purpose of Buddhism is to make people happier. That's it. Not salvation, not join the religion, not this, that, and the other, but it's how to find personal happiness. And in a modern way, we'd say it's the original self-help philosophy. And it's the, whoops, somebody's dialing in. It's the original self-help philosophy. Charlotte, what do you think that is? I hear a telephone.
You should mute the other participants.
Okay, let me see if I can mute them.
Excuse me, Jeff, yeah. That's my home phone. Sorry.
Okay.
Hello, Tony. I'm online. Thank you.
Yes, and Charlotte, can you help me mute everybody?
I can't do it. You have to do it.
All right. Trouble is, I have to, forgive me, guys. Let me try to get this done here. And I have to figure out how to move all this stuff. And I have to manage participants, and I have to say mute all. There. Good. All right. I will try to show you, right now I'm showing you images of very traditional Theravadan Buddhism. It is their beautiful art, the robes, the ochre robes, that's characteristic of Southeast Asia. The original Buddhists of Buddha's time, the original people that were with the Buddha, they practiced homelessness. They lived in the forest. Rich people would put them up in sort of houses, or sometimes sort of small, they would actually be very informal little homes, almost made out of thatch. They would let them stay during the rainy season, but most of the time they wandered homeless, they owned nothing, and they were strict renunciates. What I'm going to show you later on is what Buddhism is being turned into today, meaning with people dressed in street clothes, not necessarily monastics practicing Buddhism. So it's being adapted for contemporary cultures and contemporary ways of life. Whoops. Buddhism has 4 principal approaches. 3 of them are called yanas. I know that's a little confusion. The 4th one doesn't necessarily have yana at the end of it. It's called dzogchen. But yana means vehicle or path. Vehicle, in one of the great analogies of Buddhism, is like a boat, like a raft, like a way across a river. What's the river? The river of all the difficulties of life. How do you cross this river and find some kind of promised land, some kind of sense of ease, some kind of sense where you're not so plagued by your own kind of emotions and thoughts? So anyway, the first of these yanas or vehicles is called the little vehicle or the little raft. And that's because traditionally the Hinayana focuses on individual awakening. You might be doing it so that you can benefit your sangha or your spiritual community or the people around you, but nevertheless, you're working on your own stuff. You're trying to do individual awakening. By the way, to be honest, most of us are working on ourselves and working towards our individual awakening. There's nothing wrong with that. The Hinayana is considered a foundation for any later of the yanas in Buddhism. Quite apart from its notion of it being a religion, its spiritual path is something everybody in Buddhism must traverse as they go through Buddhism. It's the prerequisite for later development. It's, as I told you, it was based on the original teachings of the Buddha, which is called Tipitaka, I think it is, or the Pali Canon. The Pali Canon is called the Pali Canon because Buddhism wasn't really written down to many centuries after Buddha's death. And it was actually written down on leaves, tropical leaves. And the script, and it was written down in Pali, a country called Pali, and in a language called Pali. It's often identified with Theravadan Buddhism, which translates as the teachings of the elders, of the original teachings. And Theravadan Buddhism was one of the first schools of Buddhism to really be announced in the West. And a number of classic books, Jack Kornfield, many of these people wrote, used Theravadan Buddhism teachings to create the contemporary mindfulness movements and something called insight meditation. Many of you might have heard of that or somebody be interested in it. Couldn't recommend it enough if it's something that you feel appeals to you, especially after this talk today. This Theravadan Buddhism, the original teachings of the Buddha, as I mentioned, they were homeless. They were strict renunciates. It's based on a monastic ideal of renunciation of desires. It's based on the cultivation of virtue, and it's based on the elimination of negative mind states. It's designed to foster positive, loving mind states by training and purifying the mind. Having said that, notice I don't mention anything about kind of ritual. I don't mention anything about worshiping anything. I don't imagine about any kind of divine image of the Buddha. The original Buddhism is about a monastic ideal of renunciation of desire and the cultivation of virtue. As a friend of mine likes to say, it's about renouncing harmful, negative tendencies, promoting virtue, and training the mind. The Hinayana path involves the overcoming of all the causes of suffering. Again, that's a remarkable claim. It even defines what are causes suffering for human beings. By the way, I'm going to mention that these are not my opinions about Buddhism. I'm giving you the traditional teachings as best I can in honor of this ancient path. I'm going to be using phrases, words that are sort of, you could Google if you wanted to read more about, because these are traditional ways of listing and describing this path. So what are the causes of suffering and discontent? Craving and attachment, ignorance of the nature of mind, emotional problems or kleshas, and habitual karmic tendencies and habits. I'm going to go over this more later. I'm just going to note these now, because I wanted to give an overview of the different paths. The Hinayana emphasizes ethical conduct, loving kindness, which is called metta, and the development of mental concentration to create a calm, balanced, and a joyous state of mind. The goal of the Hinayana, this is interesting to note, as the Buddha taught it, was nirvana, which is peace, but also nirvana, strictly, it means extinction. It's the extinction of personal suffering. One who has achieved this state of nirvana is called an arhat. And what I've done is I created a Chinese statue from some period in Chinese art of an arhat. This is not a divine being, nor is it a symbolic being. It's literally meant to be a depiction of a monastic who had achieved the extinction of personal desire and had become an arhat. The number of Buddha's disciples were arhats. A number of people had achieved what we might call this extinction or nirvana during Buddha's day, and there are many people now who have achieved nirvana. It's not some impossible refined state. It's something that's doable. So I'm giving you an overview of the 4 yanas. So I gave you, that's the first one that we're going to be basing our talk on today, was the Hinayana. The second great path is called the Mahayana. Maha means great. It was developed out of the original insights of historic Buddha, but it was developed and flourished in what I described earlier as these great Indian Buddhist universities. That would be huge monastic institutions with hundreds or thousands of monks. And there was a great deal of discussion and philosophy. I'm going to tell you right now that classical Buddhism was probably more philosophy and less about meditation. There was also a monastic path. You were expected to renounce the world to take up the study of Buddhism. This all happened about 1,000 years ago, and in India, it came to an end during the Mughal invasions, the Muslim invasions, where they destroyed and dispersed all the Buddhist teachings, and the Buddhist teachings spread. There was a diaspora of Buddhist teachings throughout the Asian countries. Mahayana Buddhism includes many of the schools and approaches of contemporary Buddhism, and this includes a lot of Buddhism, some of which emphasize meditation, some of which a lot of Westerners are interested in, some of which are really culturally specific. For example, some people are interested in Pure Land or Amida Buddhism, but most of the time I think you're Chinese or Japanese to be interested in those particular forms of Buddhism. And Tibetan Buddhism, as everybody knows, until about a century ago, was almost a little known and almost forgotten spiritual tradition way off in the mountains of Tibet until the Chinese invaded, and there was a diaspora all over the world, and now it's a very rapidly growing and very, I think, well-known approach within Buddhism. All of this is within the Mahayana. I'm also going to mention that I mentioned that there was the original Buddha was just monks. He emphasized it was about the cultivation of virtue, about the overcoming of negative mind states, the practice of loving kindness. There was little emphasis. The Buddha, you did not worship the Buddha. The Buddha did not claim to be a divine being. When people would ask the Buddha about, what about God? Buddha said, listen, I am here to teach about suffering and about the overcoming of suffering. And he would maintain what they call a noble silence about arguments about the nature of, the universe or about God. Nevertheless, there's many forms of Buddhism that involve elaborate devotional practices now. Why? Because human beings need them. And Buddhism is very practical. So I've shown you this wonderful little altar with these wonderful gold Buddhas, and that represents, I think, a Pure Land form of Buddhism. And I won't go into all the iconography, but it's all quite symbolic. And to me, I'm smiling because it looks in Western stuff, it would be like the difference between certain kind of austere Shaker approach to Christianity and about some particularly elaborate, big Baroque Catholic church. Same religion of Christianity, two very different expressions of the same philosophy. The Mahayana expanded the goal of extinction, of personal overcoming of suffering, and they made it into an ideal of Buddhahood or enlightenment. Buddhahood is where you would obtain a teacher of mine define what is Buddhism versus Nirvana. What is Buddhism? He said it's the ability to create infinite benefit for other beings. The ideal of Buddhism can't be separated from the ideal of the Bodhisattva ideal. That's the enlightened mind of compassion. The idea that in the Mahayana, the ideal is to become a being like a Bodhisattva, which would have an exalted notion of consciousness, of tremendous compassion, and the dedication to bring all other conscious thinking entities to a state, again, where they overcome the notion of suffering. Bodhicitta, again, is the awakened mind of compassion and wisdom. Class 2 will go into much more discussion about what all these things mean. Also, you should know the Mahayana has the ideal of the Buddha nature, or Tathagata Gautama. That's actually not a concept from the original Buddhism. It's something that many, I'm sure all of you have heard of, but it's something that was sort of invented through the Mahayana. And of course, that's the Dalai Lama addressing thousands of people. I've gotten to see the Dalai Lama 5 times, I think, in this life. So, and he is a spokesperson for the Mahayana Buddhist faith, even though he's a part of the Tibetan community. The Mahayana has both a monastic and lay practitioner focus. As Buddhism spread from India into Southeast Asia, all these people who didn't want to be, or couldn't become monks said, what are we supposed to do? And they gradually evolved forms of Buddhist worship and practice that was designed for ordinary folks, householders. Key themes then that appeal to both the monastic community and to lay practitioners. By the way, I'm no monk, and actually very few Americans are. A lay practitioner. What are ideas that appeal to everybody? Well, the union of compassion and wisdom. The Bodhisattva ideal of gaining the enlightenment, but always whatever you do is also for the benefit of all other beings. That's a Mahayana ideal that certainly appeals to me and appeals to many people who are interested in Buddhism. A Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva ideal, that work of art to right over there on the other side, I think it's to my right, I hope it's to your right also, is a Chinese depiction of these, it's actually a very high level of consciousness depicted as a human being. But it's a some people, I guess, in the devotional Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, would think of these as almost actual entities or living beings. But it's it's almost a symbolic form of the mind of bodhicitta. Another key idea in the Mahayana ideal is, you remember that the Buddha, to his monks and to the people practicing Theravada Buddhism, you could achieve nirvana if you follow the path. You could do it in this life, probably. If not, you'll do it within a few other lives. There is, in fact, some fairly exact directions in the Theravadan path about if you're a stream enterer, as they say, you'll achieve Buddhahood in this many lifetimes. They describe that it's a very achievable goal. The Mahayana assumes that this other ideal of enlightenment is a gradual process, and it may take many lifetimes to achieve. And most monastic practitioners, most Mahayana Buddhists across the world, assume that they're working towards this life as part of a number of lives, and you're accumulating merit and virtue that will be gradually accumulate, and slowly you obtain Buddhahood. That's not what all Mahayana Buddhists believe, but that's a common assumption. The third of these yanas that I described, the first one was the Hinayana, second one was the Mahayana. Remember, the Hinayana is the small raft for individual practitioners. The Mahayana is the great path of the Bodhisattva, where everybody gradually evolving towards Buddhahood. The third is called the Vajrayana, which means the diamond vehicle or the diamond path. Vajra is also a term for a thunderbolt, also sort of a staff of office. It is considered a subset of the larger spirit of the Mahayana. They also have bodhisattvas. They also have the notion of the enlightened state of awareness. They also have this notion of the union of wisdom and compassion. It's the primary practice. It's the main Buddhist path for the Tibetan tradition. And the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is actually Tantric Buddhism, an emergence with a shamanistic religion called Bön. And it is responsible for some of these wonderful and exotic images that are in the Vajrayana tradition, which I'll tell you, the Buddha would have simply looked at that and, well, I won't speak for what the Buddha might think, but the Buddha would recognize that as more of an Indian tantric image than the kind of thing the original Buddha, as far as we know, wasn't into temples and images and all that. He was into a renunciation. Tantra, however, is something that Buddhism borrowed or fused with emerging tantric traditions in medieval India. And it is based on not worship in the conventional sense. These are meditational deities. And Tantra involves elaborate ritual, very careful initiations, and what the Tantric Buddhists would call deity practices. Very mysterious. You might find yourself gravitating towards it, or you might find yourself kind of faintly like, nah, it's too weird for me. I would prefer something simpler. Well, it's okay. Buddhism is about finding approaches that work for all kinds of human temperaments. And there is always people that gravitate and are attracted to this kind of practice, this kind of ritual, and this kind of sort of mystical discourse, which these represent. This particular deity is a favorite of mine. Her name is Vajrayogini. And I will tell you more about Vajrayogini in the third class, which is going to be about the Vajrayana. Finally, the Vajrayana path involves inner yogas and energy body practices and visualizations. I think the people tuning in, you guys will recognize a little bit of what I'm saying about. And again, I'll talk more about it when we talk about the Vajrayana path. The Vajrayana also is the path that emphasizes great deal of devotion to the guru or the spiritual teacher. Also a great deal of devotion to the image of the enlightened state of mind that's represented by the Buddha and by all these deity practices. Again, a very different flavor from the original Buddha, who I did not think encouraged any kind of special worship of the original Buddha. But that's not quite what goes on in the Vajrayana. The Vajrayana is considered not for everybody. It's considered Mahayana, great. Everybody's going to love it. There's something for everybody in the Mahayana. The Vajrayana is considered to be very demanding, very rigorous, and certainly not for everybody. In fact, the Vajrayana requires a substantial commitment. It means your life is about this. And the goal is the perfection of what the Vajrayana people call the three kayas. This is the different basically it's enlightened mind, enlightened body, and enlightened expression in the world. That's, in a nutshell, is what the three wisdom bodies of the Buddha is about. So finally, the fourth path. It's called Dzogchen. It's very similar to something called Ati Yoga. It's very similar to something called Mahamudra. These are considered the culminating paths in Tibetan Buddhism. And Dzogchen is kind of the catch-all name for all of them. It's called the resultant vehicle because it makes a very audacious claim. It claims, what on earth are you working for? You are already enlightened right this moment. You're just not aware of it. You are literally in possession of a gigantic treasure. You don't realize it. You're sitting on a gold mine. You're not aware of it. You have all the money you could ever need in the bank, but you don't have the password to the bank account. So anyway, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your life. But for various reasons, you don't realize that. You don't believe it. The Dzogchen path, they say, is Buddhist, but in a way, the Dzogchen path has always existed. And what I've showed you over there in that picture is, remember the image that you have in your mind of the Buddha. Ochre robes, not those orange robes, ochre robes, drawn with a begging bowl, surrounded by his monks in the forest. And look at this character. It's a very different style of Buddhism. Lush, over the top, full of symbolism. And this guy is no monk. He's what they call a yogi. And you can be married. You can be involved with the world if you're a yogi. And it's very different. His particular costume and his outfit is what identifies the particular kinds of Dzogchen practitioner he is. But you can be dressed in quite ordinary ways. Dzogchen, again, is very, very similar to many Kashmiri Shaivite traditions and other sort of Indian yogic traditions. And finally, Dzogchen, it's considered the most advanced of the Nyingma, which is one of the 4 principal schools of Tibetan Buddhism. It's called the old school of Tibetan Buddhism. It's the oldest form of Tibetan Buddhism. Dzogchen is considered extremely simple. And for that reason, right now, it's very fashionable. There's lots of people running around calling themselves Dzogchen teachers or studying Dzogchen. At the same time, if you read about it, you're warned it's very difficult, precisely because it's so simple. I'll talk more about it when we do the 4th class, which will be on Dzogchen. The goal is to be completely relaxed and to do absolutely nothing. And you think to yourself, what is that? Think of what the Buddha was talking about, renouncing all desire, renouncing the world, perfecting virtue. And Dzogchen is saying, no, you're already perfect, do absolutely nothing. What? Well, first of all, it's not that easy. So more on that when we talk about Dzogchen. Right now I want to go to, because I don't want to keep this too long, what was it that the Buddha learned? We're going all the way back to the primordial Buddhism, the original Buddha. And I'm going to be relying a little on the legend of the Buddha because it's a teaching story. They put it together so that monks and us, hearing the story of the Buddha, would get what the basic issues are for Buddha. So what did he learn? Well, one thing that I take to heart is everything that we want, or that a lot of us want, the Buddha already had when he was a young prince. Again, look at that wonderful movie, The Little Buddha. So most of us want, I need more money. I need more stuff. He already had great material, intellectual, and artistic wealth. He already was a very successful artist, Jan. He was I'm just saying that that's something that some of us would want. He already had he was a brilliant intellectually. He had great material wealth. So he already had all that stuff that most of us spend our lives trying to get. The other thing he had is he had all the status you could possibly want. He was rich and famous. He was highly admired from boyhood. Another thing that most of us want, note these 4 desires that people have. The next one is pleasure. He had all the wonderful, delicious food. He had great friends. He had all the intellectual and stimulation and aesthetic stimulation. He had all the sex you could ask for. He was beautiful. He had perfect health, and he lived in beautiful surroundings. And finally, in terms of fame, everybody acknowledged, and I won't tell you all those stories and the legends, that he was an accomplished warrior, intellectual, he was a leader, everybody loved him, he was admired. In other words, it's just like, my God, he already had everything. The Buddhist, well, it's part of the legend. He had already achieved a birth where all this stuff came to him. Nevertheless, he had a spiritual crisis, and I would love to tell you the whole story, but let's just say when you watch Little Buddha, you'll notice that he kept noticing strange things when he was about, I think he was 16 or something like that, that everybody always was cheerful. Whenever sometimes people would leave the court and then reappear months later, and what was going on? He actually his father and mother were raising him in a situation where he never saw the miseries that ordinary people go through. So the legend has it that he bribed everybody, and he took his charioteer, a man who was deeply devoted to him and loved him very much, his charioteer, and they went out and he said, I want to go and see what life is actually like. This is very famous, the 4 sights. Imagine being this perfect young man surrounded by all the luxury you could possibly imagine. For the first time, he saw a very old person. This is ancient India. Most people wouldn't live this long. But imagine a person hobbling along in a cane, all wrinkly, all emaciated, begging maybe, teeth falling out, eyes running, all the miseries of old age. He was deeply shocked, and he asked his charioteer, he said, who is that? And the charioteer said, no, let's go, Lord. Don't look at that. Don't look at it. He said, no, I want to, what's the matter with that person? And Lord, finally the charioteer admitted, he said, Lord, this happens to everybody. It's happening to your mother and father, the king and queen. It'll happen to you. It happens to everybody. Everybody goes old. Your body falls apart, and you just, you lose everything. You stop being pretty. And he went, oh my God. The legend has it that he did 4 separate trips. The second trip, same thing. He saw somebody, this is ancient India. So imagine a leper, or before the modern times, most of us had terrible diseases. Pockmark, didn't have teeth. We suffered from all this stuff. He saw somebody, let's say, with leprosy. And he said, what on earth, what happened to that? Same thing, charioteer said, well, actually, you don't know it, but it is inevitable that people get sick. It's almost certain that you'll experience in your life, well, let's say it is certain, that at some time or another, you're going to be very sick and you're going to suffer a lot. And there's going to be, you might even, you're going to be, your body will be wrecked by it. He was shocked. The next vision that he had, the next sight that he saw, and the next trip was, of course, he saw a corpse. And he thought, oh my God, what is, he had no idea that people died. So the legend goes. And the charioteer told him, you don't understand, Lord, this is you. What life is, that is, you're born. There is a lot of good times, a lot of pleasure, but far more sorrow. And chances are you die from disease, you die in misery, and then you're taken down and they set you on fire. That's it, you die. And Buddha was amazed. What happens to you? Do you lose everything? By the way, that person being cremated was surrounded by mourners. I don't know what it was like in ancient India, but in India up to about 18th or 19th century, if you were a widow and you're the bread maker, the person in charge of the household died, you were in serious, serious trouble. You often had no one to take care of you. You were reduced to the status of being a beggar. And in many parts of the world, that's still the case. I mean, who is going to take care of you? Or when you're old, and who's going to take care of you when you get sick? So anyway, it was quite terrifying. So the corpse being carried down for the cremation was surrounded by people screaming and mourning, really, really unhappy, because this person who was supporting a family had died. The fourth sight, of course, is the Buddha was Chagan and saw a monk meditating, or not a monk, it was a yogi meditating under a tree. And you can see this little picture that I found on the internet here, and you see this monk over here meditating on a skeleton. And he's a Buddhist monk, even though that's Siddhartha in the chariot there over there, but he's being a good Buddhist monk because he's meditating on samsara and the limitations of conditioned existence. And the Buddha, the same thing, looked at this yogi and said, I've got to figure this out. I am going to leave my life. He left his wife, he left his family, and he left his parents. In those days, I want you to understand what that means. Think about it for yourself, what it would mean if you left your job, your family, all of your friends, left everything behind. That's quite something. And he did that to find the truth. And the legend says he met some fellow renunciates. And he also quickly, in the next 5 or 6 years, where he was on this path, he met, I'm trying to remember how old he was when he went on the path. I wrote it, I can't quite recall. Maybe I wrote it down. In any case, he was on that path for about 6 or 7 years. He was with fellow renunciates. He began to practice those severe austerities that I mentioned before. There's another image of him. And he met several meditation teachers, meditation masters, gurus, who taught him all of the known spiritual paths of that time. He was quite brilliant and could master these things very quickly. So quickly that in a number of years, he had mastered all of them, and he began to actually have his own disciples. What he was learning at that are still being taught. I've been taught a number of these practices. It leads to very highly refined states of consciousness. You can actually become unconscious of having a body. You can enter states of extreme bliss, states of luminous awareness where everything is filled with light. But he mastered all this stuff, and in the austerities there, he's literally trying to overcome all the limitations of the body and of the spirit. But he realized eventually, he said, what am I doing? He said, by trying to escape all of the problems of the world through exalted states of meditation is not the answer. Why? Real simple. States end. I can say for myself. Let's say you have one of those things that some of you mystics out there have read about. You have a massive enlightenment experience. Oh my God, you're one with everything. Well, it lasts for, I don't know, if you're lucky, a half an hour. Then you come back. All of these states, you have a mystical vision. You see Buddha or you see Christ. That's wonderful. And maybe it'll change your life. But the vision itself, it comes and goes. The Buddha said, what am I doing? These are just, I kill myself to achieve these states. And then an hour or two later, I'm back in right where I am. So he said, nevertheless, he knew that meditation, a principal goal of Indian philosophy and Buddhism in particular, is that it's about your mind. It's not about God. It's not about your circumstances in life. It's about the mind. It's about your experience. Let me put it that way. It's about what happening to you. Just so-and-so understand it doesn't do you any good. You need to master it yourself. So he resolved, I'm going to do that. And the legend is that he meditated for 7 days. That's continuous deep samadhi meditation, 7 days straight with no food or water, underneath what they call the Bodhi tree. It's actually a pippin tree. I think that's how you pronounce it. The descendant of the original tree from 2,600 years ago still exists. And it is now a big shrine in Bodh Gaya in India, which pious Buddhists all over the world now go to see it. The Buddha arose from his meditation. And the legend has it, at first he said, now I understand it all. And he says, nevertheless, I don't think anybody else could possibly understand what I now know for a certainty. He says, I don't think anybody else can understand it. The legend has it that all the gods came down from heaven. Because the Indians and Buddha, they still assumed that there were gods and celestial beings. They just took that for granted. They all came down and they begged the Buddha, no, you must go out and teach. You have something that can actually save all of these poor, suffering human beings. Remember, the Buddhists and the Indian philosophy exalts the state of being a human being. You can go save these people if you will teach them. And the Buddha said, well, maybe. And he said, okay. And he formulated the essence of what he had taught into what he calls the famous Four Noble Truths. He taught these truths for 45 years. He developed a very large contingent of monks. The legend has it that almost everybody he met, his family all converted to Buddhism. The legend has it that this was all done rationally. They didn't come and worship him as a divine being. He would actually just quietly discuss it with people. And he would point out to them logically why the Buddhism was flawless. He would say, do you find any problem with this issue? And he said, think about it for a while. And they would think about it. And he said, no, actually, you're right. I mean, I thought it through pretty carefully. I can't find any fault with the way you put it. He said, okay, I want to become a monk. The legend is he passed into nirvana or extinction, fancy name for death, and it's kind of sweet. He would beg for food every day like he insisted his monks would do. Everybody had to beg for food. That taught you charity. It taught you, teaches you lots of things. It teaches you humility, among other things. It's very difficult to beg from other people. And it's still a tradition in Theravada Buddhism is to go out once or twice a day and to beg for food. Well, anyway, the Buddha with his monks, one of the guys was out there and somebody put some poison mushrooms in unknowingly into his food bowl. And the legend adds that he knew it was poison because they attributed exalted insight to the Buddha. But he ate it anyway, and he died from it at the age of 80. And of course, his order of monks, and the legends have it that at first it was male monks, and later on either his mother, actually it was his aunt, begged him to please teach something for the women. You can't leave us out. And he said, okay, I will. And he created an order of nuns. So anyway, the nuns and the monks memorized all his sutras, and in the centuries following, gradually formulated what they call the Sutrayana tradition, the sutras, which are the original discourses, the teachings of the Buddha. So what are these famous 4 noble truths? Very important. The first one, this is the heart of the beast, is the truth of dukkha. This is frequently translated as suffering, but it's not quite the right translation. Suffering, when our culture means like, oh, woe is me, it's more subtle than that. It's the state where stuff isn't quite the way you want it. There's always something wrong. It's like right now I'm in California, Southern California. I'm in San Diego. What's wrong with it? Well, it's raining outside. So a lot of people would find that very irritating. My God, it's chilly and cold. It's supposed to be warm. State of dukkha is different kinds of dissatisfaction. Life doesn't really work. No matter how much effort you put into it, things are never completely right. Well, yes. Buddha said, yes, that's true. That's why life, I don't want to forgive the use of the term, life sucks. I mean, what's that phrase? You work all your life and then you die. I mean, what's the point? You get some pleasure, but you get a lot of things that you don't want also. It's, yes, it's, you can say, smell the roses, that's great, but what about the time when you're on the freeway, and you're locked in traffic? There's always these irritations in life. So he says, this is the dukkha of ordinary suffering, physical and mental suffering associated with birth, old age, and death. Well, think about ancient India, when the good chance were you would die in terrible suffering with a horrible disease. Dukkha of ordinary suffering. We live in a culture like you go down to the local Trader Joe's and you get wonderful instant meals. At the same time, you have to work hard to make the money to go get the meals. All right, we live in a culture where things aren't so bad, and we do our very best to be rich and successful so we don't have to suffer from old age and death. But we do. It's more subtle. It might be called anxiety. It might be called depression. It might become the internet. It might be called politicians that you can't stand. We suffer just a little bit more subtly than they did in ancient India. There's a subtler form of suffering is change, impermanence. Let's say you finally got, somebody gave you $10,000. Well, 3 years later, you wish you had another $10,000. Everything changes. You finally meet the person of your dreams. They get sick. Everything changes. You finally get, you get into the school you wanted to get into. You get there and you realize that it's going to cost you a fortune. Everything changes. Everything changes. Everything's impermanent. More to be said about that later. But it is one of the cardinal teachings of Buddhism is get into it. Nothing stays the same. This causes profound anxiety, and most of us are in a state of denial about the fact that everything is constantly changing, and we have no control over the fact that everything changes, although we sure would love to have control. We finally get things figured out. We want it to stay that way, and yet everything changes. Finally, the dukkha of conditioned states. Life doesn't conform to what we want. We always make these grand plans, and yet there's always something going on that makes it more complicated, doesn't quite work out. We didn't quite think it through. We can't quite figure it out. Life is about trying to control basically an uncontrollable situation because everything's changing. You can never figure out all the variables, right? Conditioned states technically simply means that everything is interdependent. In other words, you need the money to pay the rent. You need the rent because you need a place to live. You need a place to live because you have yourself and your family to take care of. They all need a place to live. That means you need to have a job. To have a job means you need to drive to work. To drive to work means you have to have a car. Everything is a conditioned state. Everything is interdependent, and it's uncontrollable. So the Buddha said, okay, that's the way it is, and you're a fool to deny it. I agree. Yeah, you can say that's a mighty gloomy thing to say. The Buddha would say, that's suffering. The fact that you found that to be a gloomy thing to say, that means that you're afraid of it, and you don't want to hear about it. But, it is the state of the way things are, and the Buddha was that's why he would just discuss things with people, and he'd say, why? Have you got it figured out so you live perfect existence? I did. And yet I realize now that everything grows old and dies. I mean, I had it perfect. I said, do you have it all figured out? And people admit, no, I don't. I said, well, finally the Buddha, after enlightenment, he says, you know why you suffer? And it was so simple, it was hard for people to really grasp this. It's quite a subtle issue. He says it's because of dukkha caused by craving. So you think to yourself, what does that mean? Well, first of all, you want to be happy. You want to have a good time. You want things to be nice. You want things to be pleasant. Basically, you're craving for sense pleasures, which means, and you just want nice things. You want some nice food. You want a place to sleep that's comfortable. You want a car that works. These are all sense pleasures, okay? Yeah, I have a lot of suffering over things where I just want things to be nice. More subtle than that. Well, actually, you also crave because you want people to like you. You want to have a feeling that you're successful, that that the life is worth living, don't you? You want to have a feeling like things are going to work out. Be hopeful. You know, these are all things I want to be something. The subtext is I want to be something that I am not now. You say, I just want to be happy. That implies on some level you aren't always happy now. So all I need is just enough to get by. Well, that implies that you don't have enough to get by now. It's future-oriented. The craving to be is future-oriented. It implies, the next one, it implies that maybe you aren't now. Okay? You aren't the way you want things to be now. You need them to be different from the way they are now. Buddha said, isn't that the case? People think about it. Well, no, I like my job. And Buddha said, oh, really? Well, I don't really like my boss. Oh, yeah. Say, but I'm very happily married. But your spouse is going to die, don't you think, sooner or later? Yes. That sounds terrible. Why are you being so negative? I said, Buddha said, I'm sorry, that's the way it is. Buddha also, another form is, we have a craving not to be. What does that mean? We want to get drunk. We want to meditate till we're happy. We want to go on vacation. Finally, this is very subtle. You know, we want to stop having all our negative thoughts. All of us listen to an internal dialogue that sometimes says, you're great. And a lot of times they're like, you forgot about this. What about this? They're going to be mad at you. We get so, oh my God, we're so tired of that. We want to get away from it. We want not to be. We don't want to be in the situation we are now. Buddha analyzed this, got it spot on. People couldn't argue with it. So people, okay, you win. All right, you win. What am I supposed to do? And he said, well, it's worse. He said, the problem that you're suffering so much is basically you don't understand what's going on. You don't understand what I'm telling you, the Four Noble Truths, but you also don't understand everything's impermanent and there's nothing you can do about it. He says, you don't understand the true nature of yourself. This is another key. I said impermanence is a big main topic in Buddhism. Here's another one that's very confusing to people, but there's a good side to it. Very confusing. Since you're ignorant of the true nature of yourself, you don't know who and what you are. There's a doctrine in Buddhism that confuses people called anatta, which means non-self or no self. Buddha said, listen, everybody's talking about your immortal soul. And, you know, you'll meet people saying, well, you know, I know that I'm an incarnation of Cleopatra or King somebody other. And now I'm here in this life. And I'm going to incarnate and be another person with a new body in my next life. Buddha said, oh, that's interesting because I don't even think you're a self in this life. And people say, what do you mean? I am myself. I know who I am. Buddha said, really? He says, I've looked into the matter very carefully. And what I've noticed is that what I sense about what is me, quote unquote, it's just a bundle of what he called baskets or gatherings or skandhas. We would understand it from Buddha more likely saying, actually, we're a bundle of psychological processes. And this has been abundantly confirmed in contemporary neuroscience. You can read, for example, well, the nightmare of Alzheimer's, for example. A person is still aware there seems to be me present, but I don't know who I am or where I am. I don't know what you are. Nevertheless, I experience there's a me present. There's states where the senses function, but the consciousness is not there. The person is not there. They're in a coma. There are states when you're drugged or when you're drunk where you become different than where you are. And here's more subtle, you'll know that. You know that even though you said, I am that person I was when I was a child, are you? You think completely different. You look completely different than what you are now. Your ideas are completely different. What makes you think you're the same person you were when you're a child? You have a memory of yourself being a child, but where is that child now? It's just a memory. In actual fact, if that child and you met one another, would you have anything in common? No. What Buddha said is what is the self is actually a series of interrelating psychological processes. And I'm going to include your larger environment, your cultural conditioning and your family are part of that mix. You're constantly shifting. Did you come up with a language that you speak and talk to yourself in, the English language or whatever language you speak? Did you make that up? Did you give yourself your name? No, other people did. You're a composite. You're a system. You're a processes, series of processes. Get into it. There is no you. Or what you are is an energy system. Think about it. You're an ecology. You're not an individual entity persisting in time. You're a conditioned being. And you think, oh, but where am I? Don't worry, you're there, but you're like a whirlwind. You're constantly changing. And the good news is that means that you can change. Anyway, people suffer, ignorance of the true nature of self. It's because you want to hold on to the way you think you are, but in fact, you're a series of processes and you're always changing. You forget things. You're always in a subject of change. You don't have something you need to hold on to. More about that later. Other forms of suffering. Kleshas. The Buddhists say that both pleasant and unpleasant thoughts and emotions are suffering. Why? Because pleasant states end. Unpleasant emotions and thoughts and all that are unpleasant for obvious reasons. They talk about the three poisons. And the three poisons over there are symbolized in that nice little picture on the side. You see a snake, a rooster, and a boar chasing each other around endlessly. What is that outer ring? That is all the various incarnations, people going through various states of suffering, various states of incarnation in bodies. It's endless realms of rebirths, all being driven by the three poisons, which are our ignorance and confusion that I've been talking about, called avidya. Our attachments, we really want what we really want. And we really don't want what we really don't want. We're driven by that. By the way, it's fairly, attachment is a big subject. I wish I had more time, but oh my God, I've got to, what am I doing for time? I guess I've got till 3, I'm okay. Attachment's kind of mysterious. I'll give you an example. This is, let's say you go in and you feel a hankering for ice cream. Oh my God, I want ice cream. There is no ice cream in the fridge. Oh, I'd love some ice cream. Minor forms of suffering, but also anticipation for the pleasure of the ice cream. You hear your phone ring. You pick it up and said, hey, your spouse has been in a car crash. What? What happened to your craving for what happened to all your attachment to the ice cream? Gone. Overtaken by this other attachment to the car crash. Eclipsed. Our lives are about attachments. These are things that we feel we need for our ongoing sustenance or maintenance. That's what an attachment is. It's the stuff I have an unhealthy fixation on it. And they can be forms of attachment in a pleasant sense, but also in an unpleasant. We're attached to both things. Aversion. The Buddha stated very classically, he said, we're afraid of what we don't want, of getting what we don't want, and we're afraid of not getting what we do want. I'll repeat that. We're afraid of getting what we don't want, and we're afraid of getting what we do, or not getting what we do want. You think about it, the whole realm of fear, most of us are governed, most of us specialize in one of the three poisons. The people who specialize in ignorance, confusion, just say, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry, I'm not that interested in it. Go away. I got stuff to do. I just want to go to work and forget about it. I'm sleepy. That's people attached to ignorance. They don't want to face what their life is about. People are attached, filled with desires, hopes, plans, ambitions. I need to do this. I want to do that. I got to have that. Got to meet this person. Then there's people, I'm one of these desire types. That's my fixation. Then you have those people who are just, it's all about fear. I don't want this. I'm worried about that. I have to talk to so-and-so later today, and I'm just dreading it. And oh my God, I'm going to get a bill, and I don't have enough money, and all fear and aversion. I wish it weren't this way, and I wish it weren't that way. Sound familiar? Those are the three poisons. Ouch. Talk about suffering. It gets really real for us. One more suffering is if you needed to know, and the Buddha is just being realistic. He said the worst thing is that no sooner does one thing happen than you are drawn on to the next thing, and then the next thing, and then you forget where you are. You're constantly distracted. You can't control your mind. The epitome of not being able to control your mind is you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, the worries start, and you can't shut them off. You can't sleep. You're thinking, this is stupid. If I could just get some sleep, then I could wake up next morning and deal with all this stuff. But you can't. You're worried anyway because you can't control your own mind. And biggest shock that a person has when they sit to meditate down for the first time is realize, oh my God, this thing is out of control. Your mind, your thoughts, your emotions. I'm going to say a moment about emotions. In our culture, we privilege emotion. We say it's very good to be emotional. I'll just point out, is it? Is it good to get angry and pissed off all the time? Is it good to want that new car so much that you make yourself and your friends miserable because of it? Is that good? These are emotional situations. Is it good to be frightened of things? That's an emotion. Emotions can cause a lot of trouble too. The inability to control emotions, the inability to control our thoughts, and the inability to control our beliefs. We believe lots of things that are not true. We believe them. So the Buddha said, well, a lot of people would throw up their hands at this point and say, I don't want to hear about it anymore. It's just the way life is. I'm just going to suffer through it, try to get much pleasure as I can, and then hope I can die in a reasonable, peaceful death. And Buddha said, no, it's actually possible to permanently end this whole neurotic state that you're in. It's possible to completely end all unsatisfactory experiences and their causes. The goal, said the Buddha, of what I teaches you is the cessation, the extinction of dukkha, or what I'm calling nirvana. You should note that nirvana is often mythologized by people as some exalted state they're never going to get to. The Buddha said, no, it's not true. You don't know it, but you have temporary states of nirvana quite frequently. Often, let's say you're going out on a walk, and you just get slightly distracted. You're noticing the birds and the trees and looking around you and not thinking anything in particular, okay? You're just kind of just flowing with the flow. You're actually in a state of nirvana right then. Let's say you're just kind of peacefully driving along and you brief state like this. You're not been trained to pay attention to it. But for a while, all that internal monologue shifts away, and you look at a sight on the side of the road. You just look at this interesting field going by, and for a moment, your mind is open and empty and just perceiving things without judging, without a lot of internal racket. You're actually in nirvana, okay? So it's not that hard. You can teach yourself to do it. Nirvana is the removal, the final absence, the cessation, the non-arising of dukkha. And Buddha said it isn't magic. He said it's by thoroughly understanding the causes of suffering, which is craving and ignorance. So we say, okay, Buddha, I'm on. How do you do it? And Buddha said, the Noble Eightfold Path. It's really, I'm not particularly Hinayana Buddha type. My own practice a little bit more into the Dzogchen kind of stuff, but it's genius. It really is kind of amazing. This also is going to bring up something, and I'll only start with this stuff. It's considered the very essence of the Buddhist practice. All the forms of Buddhism, in one way or another, are simply dealing with the Eightfold Path. Okay? The legend of Buddha is that he carefully tailored it for different kinds of people and different kinds of temperaments. But it's not a creed that you must sign on to. It's a personal, it's like a 12-step program. It's a personal way to achieve personal happiness and ultimately societal or general happiness. Okay? The essence of everything that they teach in Buddhism boils down to the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths. So what are they? The first part is something, well, there they are listed. Okay, on their Pali, I think it's Pali or Sanskrit, I'm not sure, maybe it's Sanskrit, their equivalents. The Eightfold Path can be categorized into what the Tibetan Buddhist Center's Losang Samten characterizes as the three baskets, but we can organize them into three categories. The first is ethical conduct. Second one is mental discipline. The third is wisdom. For many of us, wisdom sounds great. Mental discipline sounds a little like, I don't know if I have the discipline to practice discipline. But a lot of us get a little irritated with ethical conduct. It's like, oh, come on. These are the rules and the regulations. I don't need that. I'm too good for it. The Buddha would come back and say, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, because without getting your life in order and without practicing ethical conduct, no way, zero, that you're going to achieve any kind of happiness. You got to deal with it. I agree with him. I think these are actually genius. I'm going to guess that people who really are attracted to this Hinayana path, the path of mindfulness that I'm talking to you about today, are the people that are saying, my life is a mess. I'm tired of it. I am tired of it. I want some help. I just want to be happy and I want to have an orderly, nice life. You know, is that so much to ask? I'm tired of listening to myself think. Help me. And Buddha said, yes, that's exactly the type of people I'm trying to reach. First thing you got to do is get your life in order. That means what they call sila, or ethical conduct. That means right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Why? Well, it's just saying, this is the basis for love and compassion for all living beings. By the way, if you're filled with genuine love, you've got no problems. It means that sila, ethical conduct, is what creates a happy and harmonious life for you. But also, the more ethical people there are in a society, the better the society is. I hope that doesn't strike you guys as a objectionable statement, but I think it's true. The converse is true. Unethical people create havoc. So not bad if you're concerned for others, is to be on the side of the people trying to make it a better world, not a worse world. Ethical conduct is about making it a better world. And it is an indispensable foundation for higher spiritual attainments. If you are a messed up, evil, chaotic person, it can be very difficult for you until you handle all that junk first. So how do you handle it? Right speech. Simple, but hard to do. It means that you use communications, including internet communication, and including your facial expressions, everything the way that you interact with others. Try to do it in such a way that you foster harmony and wisdom for yourself and others. That means don't lie. By the way, don't be dumb about lying. I have a little story about it, speak the truth. I was listening to an exalted Rinpoche, basically a very revered teacher. And somebody raised their hand and said, my grandma was dying, and she asked me, she was so scared, and she said, oh my God, am I going to die? what am I supposed to tell her? What am I supposed to tell her? Am I supposed to tell her that, yes, you're going to die as a Buddhist? And the teacher said, of course not. Don't tell her that. So is that lying or not? And technically, it's a little white lie. It's an omission of truth. But in the larger sense, you're doing it for a very good reason. So abstain from lying, speaking the truth. Well, maybe go all the way down to the bottom. If you can't say something useful, just keep your mouth shut. Keep a noble silence. Please don't use your communications to cause hatred, enmity, disunity, and disharmony. Watch what happens when certain people in great power and leadership positions do that. They cause havoc, make everybody mad. Please don't use harsh, rude, impolite, malicious, or abusive language. That's very hard for us to do. We all get the urge sometimes to curse at the other people. And sometimes I will complain about other drivers, but I don't do it so that they can hear it. But guess what? If you use, let's say, you're not going to like this, but if you curse a lot, you know who that hurts? It hurts yourself. It just creates a rude, ugly environment. Same thing people don't like. Idle, useless, and foolish babble and gossip. It's just not helpful. It distracts your head. By the way, that includes excessive TV watching. Use language that's friendly, benevolent, pleasant, gentle, meaningful, and useful. You'll be amazed at what happens when you try to do that. You'll be amazed at what happens when you try to speak meaningfully at the right time and place. Choose the appropriate situations to express certain things. And if you can't say something useful, just keep quiet. Right action. Don't kill. That means technically, not killing animals, but it also means don't kill a friendship. Don't kill somebody's good mood. Don't kill somebody trying to do the right thing. Don't end life. Don't end happiness. Don't take what's not freely given to you. That means you say, oh, nobody even owns this. I see a penny on the ground. Was that freely given to you? No, don't take it. Don't be dishonest. We all do it, little dishonesties, Another one, don't practice sex that harms others, dishonest. The original Buddhist practitioners had no money, had no possessions, and they had no sex. And if you're a monastic, that's still the practice, Buddhist monastic. But for the lay people, the Hinayana people like that, lots of discussion of what is appropriate sexual interactions between people. Well, harms other or dishonest. I had a wonderful person, she was into S&M, and so she was in a Buddhist class. She says, is it bad for me? I really, and she was smiling to her, said, I don't like doing this, S&M. I said, are you hurting each other? She says, yes, but we like it. I said, it's fine. I was like, what's wrong with that? Also, dishonest sexuality, we all know what that is. It basically means you're being dishonest, you're lying, and you're also killing your relationships with the people you love by dishonest sexuality. And to help others to do the same thing, practice right action. Right livelihood is another one that's very interesting. Don't make a living in a way that harms society, harms yourself, or harms other beings. This gives people a lot of pause. Let's say somebody works in a bank that you now know does dishonorable or harmful mortgage lending practices. Does that mean you should maybe quit your job at the bank? You know what? It's up to you. It's your life. It's your spiritual path. But if it's making you realize that you're contributing to a nasty situation, yeah, maybe you should think about getting another job. I think about living in a country that does terrible things, because it does. I don't know. I haven't figured that one out yet. But what does it mean that your profession, what you do for a living, what you're participating in, is in some way harming others? Think about it. This is far more interesting than these obvious ones, like, no, I'm not going to manufacture guns. I'm not going to, that kind of thing. I'm talking about subtle things. Anyway, the second one of these, remember the three baskets were, the first one was ethical conduct, sila. The second one here is concentration. That includes the three paths of the eightfold path, the path of right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Concentration is the basket that holds this group. It has with how do you discipline your mind? Why do you need to concentrate? It's the ability to focus and concentrate the mind. Think about if you can't concentrate, which most of us is not very good at concentration, we're constantly getting distracted, we're frequently confused, we can't tell between the actual present moment and our memories, our fantasy, the past and future, our worries and preoccupations. We're sitting, for example, in a beautiful garden surrounded by flowers, and there's this wonderful friend with us trying to have a conversation with us, but we're lost in our worries and our fears. Or we're so looking forward to a certain event that we're not even appreciating the present. These are habits with us, habits. And without focus and concentration, our minds are hopelessly confused by unconscious memory, beliefs, and fantasies. We see a certain person on the TV and we're saying, I hate that man. People say, what man? So-and-so. I hate that person. Do you know them? Yeah, there they are on TV. That's an electronic screen. No, I've read them in the newspapers. You're seeing them through the filter of your prejudices, your fears, your hopes, your ambitions. You're judging that person according to your own unconscious habits and addictions and your conditionings from childhood and present day. You project that out onto the world because you can't distinguish between what's in your head and what's going on in your, excuse me, I'm hearing something outside. What's actually going out in front of you. You can't tell the difference. This is the condition of the most of us. And Buddhism is designed to help you see through the fantasies that you live in. Finally, right effort. Make a constant and consistent effort to work with your own mind. This is a fairly, advanced or sophisticated practice, but it means do your best to prevent bad and unwholesome states of mind from arising. Meditation will help you do this. Try your best to eliminate your bad and unwholesome states that have already arisen. This is Buddhist languaging. Try your best to figure out a way to generate good and wholesome states of mind. And finally, feed those good and wholesome states of mind that are already present. I'm going to end on time here if I can. This is a whole complicated study. It can be as simple as this. If you're around a hateful situation, get yourself out of there. If you need to calm down, figure out a way to calm yourself down. Be happy. Don't be miserable. You can teach yourself to do this. Finally, concentration is another aspect of concentration is right mindfulness or attentiveness. It means to be aware, to be mindful, to be attentive to. Now, these are traditional Buddhist categories. What you do with your body, just pay attention. What you do, what you experience through your feelings, through your emotions, through your sensations, be aware. What is the sensation like right now? Be aware, to how your stomach feels. Be aware of what it's like to breathe. Be aware of passing emotions like mild discomfort, gee, I think I might kind of like that person. I don't know why I like that person. Be aware of all these things. Actually, what this means is please live your life. Be aware of what's actually happening to you. Don't live in the future and the past. Be aware now. This is all you have. That includes all the things that go through your mind, everything you think about. Watch it. Here's a big difference. I hate that guy versus, whenever I see that person, I get really charged up. I get really angry. One is mindful, the other one is mindless. Finally, be aware of your own ideas, your conceptions and things. Be aware of what you believe. Often you can, your judgments are based on beliefs, for example. Watch your own languaging. Watch what you say and you realize, what are the beliefs? I can't believe I'm talking as if I'm a 6-year-old kid. Watch all of that. That's right mindfulness. Now, this is the secret to liberation, is being mindful. Now, how do you do this? Well, the Buddha has a prescription of how you can train yourself to be much more like this. Again, this is the secret of how you're going to liberate yourself from your own suffering. Be aware of what's going on and work to effectivate positive, pleasant attitudes and how to work with your negative mind states. Be aware. So, the way we do this is something called the 4 foundations of mindfulness. It's from the Satipatthana Sutra. It includes meditation where you learn to focus your attention by carefully observing. I'm getting a strange message there. The first one is, and I'm going to teach a little bit more of this, is mindful breathing, paying careful attention to your breathing. I found out that the careful breathing, which is the heart of the mindfulness movement, the heart of mindfulness meditation, you see the magazine in the supermarket, which I see, which promises the miracle of mindfulness. This is the heart of how you teach yourself to be mindful. It is the one, the breathing meditation, Anapanasati, is where you adopt the yogic position of sitting very still with your hands together, cross-legged if you can manage it, upright back, or sitting in a chair if you can't, and where you plant your glass. We will practice it at the end of this session if I have time. I hope I'll have time to practice it a little bit. That is the breathing exercise. It's the heart of training it in mindfulness. However, the Buddha taught the second stage of the foundations of mindfulness, be very careful what's going on in your body. You can do this meditating or not meditating, but I suggest it's a very useful practice. In your meditation schedule, spend a certain number of minutes where you simply scan your body and watch it. Feel what goes on in your body. Another one is watch what's going on with your emotions, feelings, and changing moods. And finally, as I said before, with these dharmas, watch what you think about very carefully. Each one of these are separate but related practices. You train yourself to stop being unconscious all the time and train yourself to actually be aware of your life the way it is, not the way you want it to be, but the way it actually is. It's miraculous. So what does it mean to be mindful? Well, it's present to moment awareness. It's the ability to be fully present, attentive, and aware of what's happening now in the present moment. All of you have heard that before. All of us struggle to be present in now. As Eckhart Tolle once said, this is all there is right now in this moment. So you should learn how to appreciate it. You should learn how to live your life. It's very closely related to memory because it's recollection. It's similar to memory, but it's not the same thing as recalling an incident from the past. It just means you remember to be present. And you actually have to go around and wake yourself up. Oh, you have to bring yourself back to the present. I would suggest that when you've lost in your anger, or you're lost in reverie, or when you're lost in a mood of some kind, or you have a pain in your body, be here now. Bring yourself back to the present. Mindfulness means to be awake, aware, without being constantly spaced out, without your attention wandering all over the place, which is the usual situation for most of us, is to be constantly wandering around and not being really aware and in charge of our life. Mindfulness helps to settle and calm the mind. It also makes us one-pointed focus and concentration. You have to have a settled and calm mind in order to focus and concentrate. We've all known people who are able to do complex tasks, work on papers and things in the middle of a lot of noise. It's like at a cafe. It's because they've mastered in that way the meditative technique of one-pointed focus. They're paying just careful attention to what they're doing, and they have blocked out all of the distraction. Okay, that was the way they did it. In order to get to that state, you have to get past all of the usual emotional turmoil. Anyway, mindfulness is also non-judgmental. It's non-interfering. It's the observer. This takes some practice and getting used to, but the usual part of your mind, which is kind of saying, I don't like this. I wish that person wouldn't do that. And I need this. And why doesn't that person be quiet? All that judgment. The part of ourselves that are simply aware is not involved with judging, not involved with conversations. People frequently confuse their self-conscious judging, that internal critic, that internal voice. People mistake that for being mindful. Mindful just means being aware of whatever's going on. There's no dialogue involved with it. Shamatha is the term that refers to the calming of the mind. You're grasping. Vipassana is closely related. Here's how it works. You calm the mind, you say, oh, that feels good. That's Vipassana. That's the insight, the noticing, the calmness that allows you to notice. The notice is the Vipassana. That's the insight where you get, oh, that's what's going on. Oh, and often it's a surprise. Like, let's say you're mad at something, and then something, you calm your mind, and you say, oh, I'm angry. That's your insight. That is precious. But you need to be calm. And then you have an insight. Oh, that's the way I actually am. So the insight guides your awakening. Awakening is being awake. It means being habitually awake. You'll be amazed. You quickly figure out that what hurts, what is beneficial and what's not. What is beneficial? Stuff that makes you and others feel good. What is not? Stuff that makes you and others feel bad. How about that for a definition of beneficial and not? That is not my opinion. That's the Buddhist definition. Things which lead towards well-being and happiness, good. Things which harm and lead to negative states, not so good. All this helps you to develop wisdom. Shamatha meditation. So shamatha meditation refers to techniques that calm and concentrate the mind. So the Buddha taught this. The primary meditative technique that the Buddha taught was the mindfulness of breath. And it's the Anapanasati Sutra. I think that's it. Anapanasati Sutra. He says, if you practice this assiduously, you get these good qualities: calm, abiding mind, which is steady, composed, unified, concentrates the mind. All of us have these states occasionally, even people who don't practice shamatha. Everybody has states where they just feel calm, centered, peaceful, at ease, and well-being. Most of us, that's a pretty fleeting state. Those of us who practice shamatha meditation realize, oh, I can train myself to feel this a lot. In fact, I can train myself to generate this state pretty consistently. I'm going to get better and better at it. It'll take me a couple of years, but well worth it. Out of that calm state of mind is you suddenly see what the heck is actually going on with all of your emotional and your feelings. What's going on with your states of mind? Finally, you look at the world and you say, what is really going on? Well, I can't stand those people in Washington. It allows you to say that, well, this person's, mad about that, and this person's trying to do this, and that's going on. It allows you to discern reality with much greater ease without your constant projections and your overlay of drama and emotion. Okay? Through this insight, you overcome, the Buddhists call it 5 hindrances. All these things that are driving you, that you want, need, and desire, that distracting you all the time. You learn to be content, much more content with how things really are. You get over all your irritation and your ill will, everything that's driving you crazy. It gets over your ability of you're just you're constantly losing. You get bored, you get distracted, you don't want to hear it anymore, you get sleepy. You get over that. You stay sort of alert and aware. Get over all that anxiety and that restlessness that you have, all that fear, free-floating fear. I'm not saying that you're going to get rid of it, But let's say you will make significant dent in the amount of these hindrances that you experience, significant dent if you practice shamatha and vipassana. Finally, what is useless doubting? Doubt is, the Buddha encouraged everybody to doubt. He said, no, go ahead, question me, ask me. What is your problems? In fact, a story about the Buddha on his deathbed is he said one of his disciples, guys and women, please, anything that you're having issues with, anything that you don't understand, please ask me down. Don't wait till I die and then try to figure it out. He encouraged doubt. Useless doubt is this, is sarcasm. Oh, what a bunch of bullshit. Or, oh, don't listen to people like that. You know, or it's like, oh, I don't know. That sounds so stupid. Or what are they talking about? That's useless doubt. It makes you stupid. Okay? That's anything that makes you doubt, that makes you stupid. That's what we don't want. You want to be open, letting things in, inquisitive, balanced, and calm, so that you can use vipassana to see it clearly. Okay? And insight will develop into genuine wisdom. Deeper states of concentration, vipassana, insight meditation, leads to something called samadhi, or dhyana. These are deeper states of meditation. And they have names for them. And I will just show them here. And they sound very exotic and a little hard to understand. If you are a seasoned meditator, you've been all to these things. And you know what I'm talking about. I'll tell you right now, meditation, when you first start it, it's very difficult because your mind drives you crazy and you think, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. You're seeing your mind that's driving you crazy. You're having insight. Meditation, the analogy I like is, first you feel like you're in a little boat and you feel like you're going through all the rapids. You're bouncing all over the place. Then you feel like you're like going into a creek and you're like going occasional rapids, but it's a little bit calmer. Then eventually you go into a river and it's like it's flowing along, okay, flowing along. Finally you reach the ocean and you're in a period of vastness and stillness. And meditation is very pleasant. And it will take you a while, but believe it or not, you will get to the point where you really look forward to your meditation as a period of real joyous contentment. Or I'm going to use that phrase, pure peace, equanimity, and awareness remain. It's worth it, guys, if you devote the time to it. So finally, remember the three baskets. The first basket was sila, ethical conduct. Second one is concentrating, getting a control of your mind. Third basket is actual insight and wisdom. And the Buddha says there's the kind of knowing stuff where basically you just learn it from books, what people have told you. And you know what? Everybody changes their minds all the time. It changes. And it's valuable, but it ain't the same thing as wisdom. That's anubodhi. But penetrating insight is deep knowledge, really getting it. And I would love to talk more about it, but there's such a thing as they call intuition in meditation. If you meditate a lot, you will get very good at it. That's just when you tend to do the right thing because you don't even know quite why. You just know. That's what I'm supposed to do. Meditators come to rely on it quite a bit. They don't listen to the part of the mind where it's like, well, they said in the newspapers you ought to do this, or gee, I've always heard you should do this, or actually the cool thing to do is that. Those are all just received knowledge. Your intuitive insight is based on deep knowledge, and it's based on actually intuitively understanding the way things actually are. Okay? Deep knowledge is wisdom into the true nature of mind. You actually get friends with yourself and you realize it's just conditioned states of awareness. It's constantly changing. Somebody runs into the car, you get angry. Of course. You get a big check in the mail, of course. And then something else happens, fine. You roll with it. And you don't artificially try to stop yourself from feeling. You act naturally. You gradually find that your wisdom overcomes a lot of your reactivity. Most of us are so, bent out of shape by things that happen, or people say something and we get all upset. We react. based on our unconscious beliefs, fantasies, our addictions, our things we're afraid of, we react. That stuff calms down, and you get a lot more mellow and a lot more loving. So, wisdom and insight. I'm actually showing now, I've showed you all these historical pictures of all these Theravadan Buddhists who are practicing this foundational Hinayana approach to Buddhism. So I showed you all these monks. Well, what do they practice this stuff now? Yeah, the insight meditation movement. That's very much about mindfulness-based training your head so that you'll be a far happier and far more effective person. You're training your brain, okay? There's many books on it, excellent books that you can read, but I really suggest you take the trouble of going down to the Tibetan Buddhist Center or finding a meditation group and learn how to do this, because it works. The Buddha said, again, all I want to do is I know what causes suffering, and I want to show you how to handle it. That's what he said. Forget right now. By the way, if you want to learn about mystical things and all that, great. That's coming up in the Vajrayana and the Mahayana. This is about how to manage your head. So, wisdom and compassion are inseparably linked together. One means you have the other, and wisdom automatically makes you happy and compassionate. And right there is a picture of contemporary, it looks like to me like a pretty serious Dharma group. That's what a contemporary Americans look like. It looks like, no, I was going to say somebody in monastic garb, but no, there isn't. You see there's people sitting, and that looks like a painful meditation posture. They're sitting in ways that make it sort of feasible. You can see the hands of that one gentleman there put in a traditional mudra or meditation posture. But you see the guy on the front row of the heart, that wonderful guy is practicing heart-based meditation. So he's just practicing, you're not required to do this, but I'll tell you, the meditation yoga posture, it sure helps. It makes your mind much clearer if you can sit in that posture. If not, lots of folks in the back sitting. It is a yogic discipline. Meditation, the way the Buddha taught it like that is the actual sitting posture, the watching the breath, and other related meditation postures is a formal meditation, but there is plenty of a analytical meditation where you think things through, very important. And the second thing is just a meditation of everyday life. Awareness is about being aware all the time, not just when you meditate. So what are we aiming for? What is right thought? That's right. This is right understanding, is to have wisdom and compassion. This is, remember, we're still talking about the Noble Eightfold Path. Right understanding and right thought is selfless renunciation or detachment. Renunciation means you have to give up stuff. No, I remember somebody wrote me and said, oh, I don't want to give up the things like, doesn't mean that. It means you give up the attachment to things so you don't need it. You have it because you enjoy it. All right? You train yourself to tend to think pleasant, loving, nonviolent thoughts. And you tend to think those thoughts about all beings and all phenomena. And you tend to lessen, or you try to avoid your thoughts of where you're getting all selfish and angry and violent thoughts about people, especially self-centered thoughts about people. You just become a nice person, a decent person. And right thought, if you become a decent person, trust me, everybody in your environment will benefit. This is a well-known phenomenon. You will affect your spiritual community, your families, the people in your workplace. You will. All you have to do is gently, don't make yourself miserable, try to be a decent person following this path. You will have an effect. If there's a whole bunch of you doing this, which, by the way, there are, most people are at least well-intentioned. You do incalculable benefit for those around you without even trying. You're trying to make yourself happy, and you end up influencing the environment. So, to sum up here, the Eightfold Path, it's a way of life, basically. I've made that clear. It's something, it's a constant discipline. And you have each individual, there's no single way you got to do it. It's a personal thing that you have to develop. It's self-discipline. It's like diet and exercise. It's a self-discipline of the body, word, and mind. It's self-development, and it's purification. Purification of what? Of those things that make you miserable. Negative self-images, bad thoughts about things, stupid beliefs or harmful beliefs, okay? Emotions that are out of control. That's self-purification. It leads to the realization of ultimate reality. I'm going to talk a lot more about ultimate reality in the Mahayana and the Vajrayana sections and the Dzogchen. So if you're interested in ultimate reality, I really am. Tune in for the other classes. And finally, this is complete freedom, happiness, and peace. Do you get that? Lots of people do. Do you get perfection? Possibly. But let's just say the chances are it's going to be going a lot better for you. This is all good stuff. This is like eating good food and exercising. This is good stuff for your mind and your heart to make you a happier and better person. So that's the summary of the Hinayana path. Getting control of your life, which is ethics. Overcoming negative, destructive habits, thought, word, and actions. Calming your condition, and that means your pattern, your beliefs, your early childhood conditioning. Calming all that stuff, all that reactive mind, and allowing compassionate insight to flower in your mind and your heart. It implies you be aware and mindful. It's a disciplined, calm, and aware mind you're fostering. You really learn to embrace the fact that everything is a constant state of change. Okay? You have to let go, to quote the little phrase. You have to let go of holding on to things. But the good news is that it means that because everything's impermanent, you can, by putting good energy into your energy system right now, you will affect the way you are and you will affect your life. That's the good news of impermanence. The doctrine of no self, same thing. It means because you're just a bundle of psychological and physical processes. By physical, I mean, we all know that you eat bad food, you get in a bad mood. You eat good food, you get in a better mood. So our minds are part of our physical selves. And our minds are definitely part of the environment. You're in a pretty beautiful garden, you're in a great state of mind, usually, especially if you're a meditator. If you're in a horrible, depressing situation where people are unhappy, your heart goes out to them. You feel miserable on their behalf. That's also part of being a meditator. So having no self means you're part of the world. You're part of the system. Okay? Finally, loving kindness is the secret to happiness. It is. If you would like a proof of that, give a present to somebody you love, and you will feel great by giving them a present. Okay? If you want to feel even better, give a present to somebody you hate. That's an advanced practice, and we'll talk about it next time in the Mahayana, is giving presents to people you hate. That even we'll call it, that leads to even greater happiness. Not because it's overcoming ill will and hatred. That leads to greater happiness. Finally, nirvana, the extinction of this craving, these needs, this wish things were different than the way they are. Loosening our death grip on that. That does lead to peace. The Buddha's right. That does lead to peace. The technique, which we're 5 minutes to the end, but I'm just going to introduce this notion of shamatha-based meditation. It is mindfulness meditation. It is, on the Zen tradition, they counsel you to control the mind, try counting the breaths. I suggest simpler than that. Do the classic shine. That's the term which just means calm abiding. Training the mind to be calm, more focused, and less stressful. You direct your awareness. The mind constantly is thinking of other thoughts, wants to run off and do something else. You train the mind over and over again. That's why it's good to sit in a yogic posture that I told you about. That is where the hand is in a mudra like this or like this, left hand over right. Okay? You sit hopefully in a yogic posture. Get somebody to show you how to do this. You're alert, erect, but still relaxed. Okay? And you simply turn your awareness to your breath. The teachings vary on how you do it. Some people say, just be aware of your breath coming in and out of your nose. Other people teach you to follow your breath going down to your tummy and back up, down and up. You will be able to do it at the beginning. You will be lucky if you can follow your breath for one breath. before you're thinking about something else. Then you'll get up to 2 or 3 breaths. Tip, very important tip. Thoughts will continue to happen. Just let them go. If you look up at the thought and you chase it, you've forgotten about your breath. The trick is just be gently, calmly. Don't try to stare and concentrate heavily on the breath. If you do that, your mind will quickly start debating and saying, this is a terrible practice. I hate it. Get me out of here. Don't do that. Just gently be aware of the breath. Okay? There is kinds of advanced shamatha where you really focus the attention. But right now, just gently be aware of the breath. Watch it. The phrase that comes to mind is, you're sitting there like that and you've got this toddler. Actually, a toddler won't work. Let's say you're watching your cat or your dog. Toddler, because the toddler, you're always anxious about the toddler. Your cat or your dog, you're just watching them without thinking about anything particular, just kind of watching them. Your mind wanders, and then you come back to watching them. They're eating or something like that. You're just paying attention to it in a gentle sort of way. The goal is something that Chogyam Trungpa, great meditation master, he said, we're after cool boredom. He said, you're just feeling okay. You've got what ananda, bliss, what it actually means is you're feeling balanced, okay, and you're just kind of quietly watching it. It's actually interesting. You just quietly watch it. Periodically you forget, and you go off and think about what you got to do next, but then you come back and, just watching the breath. You may have little thoughts going like a radio playing in your head somewhere, but basically you're just watching your thoughts. The mind will tell you, this is so stupid, this is simple, this is so stupid, this is not going to do me any good. Trust me, it's going to do you a lot of good. It's like doing simple exercises, which at first people try to overdo and they hurt themselves. We all know, like to do yoga or exercise like that, is repetition. Be gentle with yourself. Repetition. And the effects are amazing. I'm going to actually, because we're going to run out of time or something, I'm going to let you could try to do it by yourself. It'd be best to do it with a group, because you will find that your mind, which is not always your friend, will persuade you that this was stupid or nonsense and you should stop doing it. I'm very impressed if you've never meditated before, if you can make yourself meditate by yourself. I'm very impressed if you can get away with it. Most of us needs a group. All of us need a sangha, somebody to touch base with once a week, once every couple of days. You get together with people who are trying to do what you're doing and discuss what's going on. I know somebody who she went to one of these groups and she said, my God, they're talking about things which nobody at work talks about. Yeah, everybody in the world is interested in keeping you distracted and away from yourself. Meditation is interested in bringing you back home. The Buddha is interested in introducing yourself to yourself. Hello, this is who you really are. Would you like to be happy? Well, you can change yourself. Just work with yourself. And you must see yourself the way you are, not the way you think you should be or could be, or false beliefs about yourself. Anyway, shamatha is the prerequisite, this calm abiding, and it's allied, the vipassana, the ability to see things as they are, which is vipassana, insight meditation. It's the ground. It's the prerequisite for all further meditation practice. How long do you need to practice meditation? How long does it take to get good at it? I would say if you give it a good 6 months, if you don't notice quite significant differences in your life, well, you probably aren't doing it right. But it's like diet and exercise. You have to figure out a way to make a habit out of it and bring it into your life firmly but gently. It will make you calmer, happier, more peaceful, and more effective. How do I know that? Millions and millions of people since the Buddha's birth have been practicing meditation, and the results are pretty consistent. The only time I suggest you might have difficulty is if you have a lot of turmoil inside yourself, a lot. It can be very hard to connect with this calm self. In which case, meditation in conjunction with other things will gradually get it, I think, will help you. Certainly, I don't think it can harm you. I'm very grateful for people who found the time to come to this talk. The next talk, again, is going to be the Great Path, the Mahayana Path. It's going to have a lot of emphasis. This was emphasis on the mind. The next one is going to be a big emphasis on the heart, on love, on compassion. What does it mean to have a fully available heart, to be open to the world? How can you learn how to do that? It means the Bodhisattva ideal, things like Tara, some of these meditational deities that we like. It means the ideal of like the Dalai Lama, of loving all people equally. It also is the great tradition of wisdom emptiness, the union of form and emptiness. Very profound, very deep. And that'll be part of the Mahayana path. So I hope everybody can see you. As I understand it, we're going to do our best to record each talk. For those people who are registered in the talk like that, the talks will be available. I would love it for you to come to the actual talk because you get to join the other people in the little boxes down below, and they really appreciate you being there and sharing this. But if you have to miss a class, you'll be able to get the recording. Also, please tell your friends. If everybody says, oh, that sounds actually kind of good, I'd like to do it, no problem. They can sign up late. They pay proportionally less for signing up late. All that money goes to the Tibetan Buddhist Center, and they will be given the recordings of the talks they've missed, okay? So tell your friends that they can sign up late, even if they've missed the class. So it's 3 o'clock. I'm going to try to end on time. Forgive me, we might end up trying to have discussion at some point, but right now I think I want to end on time. I can only see a couple of, the boxes. I think there's more boxes. Let me do a quick trip and see if I can see other people. But I'm very grateful for all you people, and I look forward very much to our second class together where we'll talk about the great path of the Mahayana, the union of wisdom and compassion. So take care. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you next time. And actually, I don't know how to turn this off.